Good morning, everyone. It's Jeff. Welcome to Veterans Perspective. Today, we are going to discuss something pretty heavy. It's actually part one of four of a series on the PACT Act. Uh, the part one just dropped. I literally just hit publish this morning on the Substack. I'll leave the link down in the description. So, as always, the podcast is based off of the newsletter article. And we are going to break down the PACT Act, what it is, why it's important for part one. Okay. So, the title of this is The Bloody Invoice. Okay. What this means is that the PACT Act is not a handout. Okay. It's a bill that the government owes for exposing military members to toxic chemicals and knowingly doing so. Okay. And knowingly doing so. Now, I have to give a disclaimer on this one. I am not a VSO. I'm not a veteran service officer. I am not a lawyer. Okay. So any information I talk about that may or may not pertain to your claim, this is not legal advice. Okay, that is my disclaimer. Okay, okay. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. A lot of this stuff is based off of politics, political facts, and my own ideas and opinions about the VA, which is what we talk about here on Veterans Perspectives a lot when we do talk about the VA, right? But it's also about why this stuff is important to us in the veteran community and why it should be important to society as a whole. That's our biggest tie-in. So I want to make sure that understands this could change this understanding of the PACT Act could change how people engage with their government, how people vote, how they don't vote if they don't vote for a certain policy, because it could impact funding for the VA, right? So these are the stakes, right? And to me, they are very high stakes. And for the veteran community, they're high stakes. But for me, that should also mean for general society, they are high stakes. Okay. Real quick, our sponsor, it is our Etsy store. I know this is a super heavy topic, but our Etsy store, as you guys know, my wife and I run our Etsy store. We do all the designs for our Etsy store. We do use a print on demand company called Gelato. They print and ship all of our products, mugs, t-shirts, sweatshirts. We even do teacher templates. We make those. Those are downloadable. She's a current teacher. I'm a former teacher. So those are all on our Etsy store. Our mugs, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and wall art. We focus on positive mental health. So if you need a break from this, it's a good place to go. Check out the store if you want to pick something up. It supports the channel. It lets us stay an independent channel because y'all know I ain't no sellout. So, please feel free to check that out. I'll leave the link down in the description. So let's talk about this bloody invoice, the PACT Act. Okay, the PACT Act, PACT, PACT Act. Okay, it's not a government handout. This is an overdue bill that for decades of what I call in the newsletter, I call it chemical negligence. The military poisoned its own troops or exposed its own troops to poisonous chemicals, and the PACT Act is intended to pay for that negligence. Okay. So the promise to address comprehensive toxic, toxics act, PACT Act, was signed into law. Television networks, man, they played it all over the place, man. You got politicians shaking hands, taking credit, blah, 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 right? Lining up to shake hands, photos, patting themselves on the back. Uh, to me, I remember the celebrities that were actually helping us. You don't see that a ton uh, in the veteran community. I mean, you do and you don't. Like, you kind of know who you can count on to always be there, right? And like, it's not a publicity stunt. So it's kind of interesting. I do know that Jon Stewart spoke out a ton in Congress on the PACT Act. Gary Sinise, who's always around. Um, so those are the people that I always remember when I remember when they were talking about the PACT Act in Congress before it was passed, right? But all these people, they stood at podiums, they talked about how the United States of America was finally going to honor its commitment to the men and women who served. As a veteran, we were like, okay, yeah, we'll see, right? To the civilian side of things, it looked like a massive, generous gift from a benevolent government. Oh, look at all the money they're giving to our veterans. It looked like a multi-billion-dollar charity program, which it's not, by the way. But let's set the record straight now. The PACT Act is not a gift. It's not a gift. It's not a handout. It's not an entitlement program, right? Like how, and this isn't in the blog, so you guys are only going to get this here in the podcast, and you're going to get some additional feelings about government, because as you guys know, I have a master's in political science, so I'll let it fly, right? The government all the time talks about stuff that you're owed. They call it an entitlement program over and over again so much that we start to believe it. Look at how they talk about Social Security, right? Which we, the people, pay for. We have dumped money into Social Security since the second it became a thing, over and over and over and over again. From the second you started working, you started getting billed, taxed for Social Security. And then they called it an entitlement. No, you paid for that. You paid for that. So the PACT Act, while we as veterans didn't pay for that with money, we paid for that with our exposure to toxic chemicals. It's an invoice that our government needs to pay. It is the bloody, severely overdue bill for decades of systematic chemical and environmental negligence by the United States military. And I'll give historical facts here in a minute. Okay? If we're going to understand why the PACT Act is the most important piece of veteran legislation in a generation, this is known as a generational bill, generational law. Okay? Generational. We have to start by telling the unvarnished truth about what actually happened. About what actually happened. So this leads into the section that I called in the newsletter the architecture of toxic exposure. So for decades, the Department of Defense operated with an absolute disregard for long-term environmental health of its personnel. Okay? The mission was the only thing that mattered. Not the people doing the mission, just the mission. The collateral damage was simply written off as the cost of doing business. Now, whenever you're engaged in combat operations, there is something known as or seen as acceptable loss of life, acceptable loss of materiel as part of that operation. But that's in the short term, okay, for a mission, for a war, right? Which is short in relative terms, right? But long-term damage is generally ignored by the military. It's generally completely ignored. Okay? In Vietnam, the military sprayed millions of gallons of Agent Orange over the jungles and other defoliants, deforesting chemicals, right? Hit over the jungle to strip the enemy of their cover, ruining the environment, certainly, right? Which they're still feeling the impact of in Southeast Asia, right? But also the men and women that it was sprayed upon in Vietnam and the men and women that were actually spraying it. The tactical logic was sound. Hey, let's kill the forest, let's kill the jungle cover, and expose the enemy. Fair. But the chemical reality was a death sentence. The men who walked through those defoliated zones, drank the water, breathed the air, were fundamentally altered at a cellular level. That has been proven scientifically. Okay, they came home to develop aggressive cancers, Parkinson's disease, and heart diseases. For years, the government denied the connection. They said, nah, Agent Orange didn't do that. You can't prove it for years. As someone who has fought with the VA for 15 years now, 10, 15 years now, I've seen so many Vietnam veterans that have fought a second war with the VA to get the benefits, not that they're entitled to, that they deserved, that they earned, that they need because of shit like this. So instead of saying, hey, we know that we gave you guys a bunch of chemicals and ordered you to spray said chemicals and then ordered you to go into the areas where said chemicals were sprayed, that probably had an effect on you and your body composition. Let's make sure you're taken care of. The VA and the government said, nah, fuck off. Nah, fuck off. That is wild. Wild. Let's fast forward to my era, post 9/11, right? For those of you that don't know, I'm a veteran of OIF 1, Operation Iraqi Freedom Phase 1. I was there during the first section of the war in 2003. Rolled on in February 2003. Okay? At the very fucking beginning, other than Special Forces stuff that happened before. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the military needed a way to dispose of waste on massive forward operating bases. FOBs. Okay? The solution was the burn pit. And I have personal experiences with the burn pit that I'll get to here in a moment. We dug massive holes in the fucking ground, which we were ordered to do, and threw in everything from medical waste, lithium batteries, and even unexploded ordnance in some cases, covered it all in jet fuel, and lit a match. I watched it happen. I did it. I drove to a burn pit 2 or 3 times a day to toss trash in there to help maintain part of it. Been there, done that. The black smoke hung over places like I was at, Camp Anaconda, Joint Base Balad, right? It was like a permanent fog over the fucking base. We all knew where the burn pit was, and not by the road you had to take. Just follow the smoke. Just follow the smoke. We breathed it while we worked. Even if you didn't go to the burn pit personally, you were still breathing in that air because it was all over that base. We breathed it in while we ate. It floated right over every DFAC on that base. Every place we ate on that base. Because guess what? At the time in 2003, the DFACs were intense. We breathed it while we slept, and the military knew it was toxic. The contractors operating the pits knew it was toxic, but it was cheap and it was efficient. We traded our long-term respiratory health for logistical convenience. And this leads us to the bullshit that we have dealt with as veterans, the betrayal of the burden of proof. Before the PACT Act, The Department of Veterans Affairs operated under a system that was effectively designed to wait for a sick veteran to die. I've said it time and time again. The VA's mantra is deny, deny, deny until they die. And in some cases, I still believe that. Deny, deny, deny until they die, because if we die, you don't got to pay us. You just got to bury us. And that's a hell of a lot cheaper than paying us what we're owed. If a 35-year-old combat veteran who spent 2 years sleeping next to a burn pit developed rare respiratory cancer, the VA did not give them the benefit of the doubt. Before the PACT Act, they were not given the benefit of the doubt. The burden of proof was on the veteran. And saying that you slept next to a burn pit wasn't proof enough. Which is wild. Think about that for a second. You fought for your country. And I don't care if you agree or disagree with the war, right? Because that's an opinion thing. But someone goes and fights for their country. They're exposed to a burn pit. They come home. They have respiratory disease, and they get a respiratory cancer. They go to the VA, and they say, hey, I was in Iraq or Afghanistan. I slept near a burn pit. I went to a burn pit several times. This has to be the cause of this. And the VA goes, no. You know what the first question they used to ask us was? Because I bet my veterans know. How often did you smoke cigarettes? How often did you smoke cigarettes? It's exactly what they asked us. Because they were looking for a blame. They were looking for a way out. They fucking knew. And we knew that they knew. The VA never gives us, the veteran, the combat veteran, the benefit of the doubt. The burden of proof rested entirely on the shoulders of a veteran who is now dying. So the VA forced that veteran to scientifically prove that the specific smoke that they inhaled on a specific Tuesday in 2005 directly caused their specific tumor 15 years later. It was an impossible standard. The VA knew it was an impossible standard, and they knew they wouldn't have to pay. They knew it. They used to deny roughly 70 to 75% of all burn pit claims. That's how it used to be. Veterans spent the last months of their lives fighting a hostile bureaucracy instead of spending time with their families. And the sick part is the bureaucracy that they were fighting has the word veterans in it. Imagine being a veteran and having to fight an entity called Veterans Affairs. It's crazy, right? Many of those veterans died while their appeals and claims were in the endless cycle, the endless loop of the appeals process. This causes a shift to the PACT Act, the tactical shift, and the P in PACT stands for presumptive. This word presumptive represents a fundamental shift in the rules of engagement for how the VA is mandated to deal with burn pit issues or chemical issues with veterans. The law itself introduced the concept of presumptive, okay? Service connection on a massive scale. It forces the government to admit that if you served in specific locations during specific time frames, you were exposed to toxins. They cannot deny your exposure. It is presumed that you were exposed. There's a list, and they break it down by era, right? You can pull up the list on va.gov. There's a list of areas and time frames of being in those areas. If you were there at those times in those areas, you were exposed to toxins. They cannot deny it. It is presumed that you were exposed to those toxins because you were. If you later develop one of the dozens of specific diseases, which they have listed in the law itself, the VA must legally presume that the military caused it. Sounds good, right? So, okay, cool. This shifted the burden of proof off of the veteran back to the government where it should have been, because the government was doing the poisoning, right? They poisoned us. You no longer have to hire a private toxicologist, because the VA wasn't going to provide you one, to prove that burning plastics cause asthma, because asthma is on the list. The law acknowledges that it does. It's sick that we had to get a law to acknowledge that. Like, only in the veteran community did we have to fight to get a law to acknowledge that to be the case, right? If you were there, you had the diagnosis, the bridge is built, the service connection is there, right? And that is a big deal. In any claim at the VA, my veterans know you have to have service connection. This builds that bridge. The PACT Act builds that bridge. However, there's a cost. The PACT Act is estimated to cost hundreds of billions of dollars over the next decade. It's going to cost. Okay? Because guess what? Veterans who have been denied are now going to say, well, guess what? I've been trying to tell you this shit for years, and now I need not just medical help, but the compensation that comes along with it as part of a disability. When budget hawks complain about the price tag, you're missing the point. I don't want to hear that shit, because most people that complain about the budget for the VA are the ones voting for wars, are the ones sending money to Israel and Ukraine. I don't want to hear that shit from you. Sorry, don't want to hear it at all, in any way. When you decide at any point in time, when a nation decides at any point in time to go to war, it agrees to pay for the bullets, the tanks, and the fuel. Guess what? Another line item on there is the broken bodies and minds of the men and women who fought that war. That's part of the bill. And if you don't like that, fuck you. Because guess what? Wars aren't fought in a vacuum where no one gets hurt. That's not how wars work. It's just not. Human beings fight wars. Human beings get hurt. Sometimes those injuries don't show up until years later, decades later in some cases. Sometimes veterans come home and ignore their injuries, mental and physical, because that's what we were taught to do. And then one day we break. Because you're looking at one right here. One day we break. And then when we go seeking help and we hear from society, oh, that costs too much. Fuck you. There you go. That's what you get from me. We did not ask to be exposed to Agent Orange, radiation, or toxic burn pits, because the first thing people will say, well, you knew the risks. Yeah, I knew that I could get shot. No one told me when I was going to Iraq that I'd be sleeping next to a burn pit and a generator. Nobody told me that. I wasn't part of any training course that I went to. Sorry, it wasn't. Sorry if that kills any sort of argument you thought you had about what you thought I signed up for in 1999 when I joined the Army, because I joined before 9/11. So in 2003, when I deployed, all of a sudden I'm making trips to a burn pit every day, sleeping next to a generator for 14 months when I was in Iraq. No one told me that I was going to do that shit. Oh, well, yeah, that's just part of war. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because I bet when you sit your fat ass on your fucking couch watching your war movies, none of that's part of the movie. But I digress. Because you're right and I'm wrong, right? The government made the mess. And the PACT Act is supposed to be the mechanism for cleaning it up. In part 2, next week, we are going to look at the dark reality of what happens when a massive law meets a hostile bureaucracy. Because shockingly, this doesn't go the way that the law is written. Because the VA messes everything up. And society. We are going to expose exactly how the VA is currently fighting back against the PACT Act and how they are using illegal tactics, in my opinion, illegal tactics to deny the very claims they promised to approve. Make sure you guys comment on the Substack or on the video. I will address comments at the beginning of the part 2 video if there are any. Okay. So if you want your voice heard on this podcast, make sure you comment. Okay. Make sure you guys like, follow, subscribe, all that jazz. Check out the Etsy store. I will leave the link down in the description for the Etsy store and for the Substack. Okay. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.